Have you ever heard it said that the idle mind is the devil's workshop? I don't know where I heard that first, but it would have had to have been from my parents. It's fairly common phrase that a lot of people have at least heard. But I've thought quite a bit about it in relationship to things that I've experienced in my life. And I'm grateful for a lot of things that have kept me from having an idle mind. I'm not so sure, in fact, that it's possible, maybe just because of my experiences, but I'm not so sure it's possible to have an idle mind. In fact, I can't remember who it was that was talking about it. It must have been a primary teacher or somebody that was trying to teach me how to take care of my mind. I remember them saying, or making the point that it's pretty hard to think about nothing. And to illustrate that point, they would say, okay, just get everything out of your mind and think about nothing. And then they would say, and whatever you do, don't think about pink elephants. And then there would just be total silence because you weren't supposed to think about anything. And in particular, you weren't supposed to think about pink elephants. Well, guess what? If you try that with somebody and they're perfectly honest with you, as soon as you say that, they'll try to not think about anything, and the only thing they can think about is pink elephants. I had somebody try that on me once. It kind of amazed me that the human mind has to be thinking. It has to be going places and doing things, except when we're asleep. And even then, have you ever wondered where all the crazy dreams come from and what's going on up there in our brain when we're trying to sleep and we're having all these activities going on in our mind? The human brain must be a beehive of activity. And that's kind of the way I've experienced it anyway. I don't know how people can say they don't think of anything. I'll quite often see my grandchildren, or sometimes my wife or whatever, and I'll see them kind of in a, you've seen the look. It's kind of you look at them and they've kind of got this far away look in their eye, like they're not thinking of anything. And you watch them for a while, just kind of got that gaze off into space look. Pretty soon you'll say, stop. What have you been thinking about right there? And invariably, they'll come up with what they've been thinking about is that there wasn't a vacancy in their mind after all. They were thinking about something. And quite often, something I've noticed too is quite often what you think about when you don't need to think about anything is very telling about you and me. I've noticed myself taking a kind of a back check, a survey of things that I've just recently thought about when presumably I didn't have anything to think about. And if you go back through and start thinking about it, if you were to write it down and be honest with yourself, and then the next time you have an experience like that, do the same thing. And if you did it very often, you find out that there are things on your mind, and they tend to lead your actions. It's one of the reasons pornography is so awful, so evil, is because once that stuff fries itself into the brain, it's hard to release what you've seen, and it starts to lead you. So I'll talk some other time maybe about the evils of pornography, but it can be other things too. It can be retribution. Somebody's done something to you, and you just harbor these feelings, and the minute you think you're not thinking about anything, you're digging up old injuries, and you're running them through your mind. And they say that self-talk is some of the most damaging talk that you can do, especially if it's tending towards something that's destructive. Now, it works the other way too. If you start thinking about positive self-talk, like can do and will do, and this is how I'll do, and so forth, and it's all benevolent, then that starts to lead your thought. And it just reaffirms the idea that what we're looking at in the mirror when we look at ourselves, and what I'm looking at right now into this camera, is a spirit clothed with a body. A spirit clothed with a body. And that spirit is valuable. It's extremely valuable. It's essential to not only your life, but a whole lot of other people's lives as it plays out over time. And I say plays out, I'm not talking about playing. I'm talking about events unrolling. And they can either unroll into places they shouldn't, or they can unroll into benevolent, kind, uplifting kinds of things. And you'll feel the difference. You'll feel the difference. If you ever see pornography, if you look at that for more than a flash of a second that it's there, you'll feel the evil. And yet, if you see a little child, feel a little child's hug, or even a squeeze on your finger, it just warms your heart, makes you feel so good. And you remember that, and you know that there's goodness there, and you feel the warmth. Well, that plays out in our lives day in and day out, to a greater or lesser degree. And I've already talked to you I've already shown you my little bell here about, when you hear that bell ringing, and it's, the source of that ringing, it's Jesus Christ trying to communicate to you through the Holy Ghost, through something that we call the light of Christ. And I don't have time right now to talk to you about that, but it's one of these days I will. It's something different than you ever imagined once you learn about it. It's not a person or a personage. It's more like a substance, and it's pretty cool. We'll talk about it someday. And so anyway, you start wondering, what do you do when you're thinking and your thoughts aren't directed? Which way do they drift? and that will tell you something about yourself. Well, I've already made that point. So a lot of the times I've talked here about experiences I've had when I was growing up, and I was on a farm, and I've mentioned that time and time again too. So I don't suppose I need to keep repeating it, but somebody might pull up one of these individually someday, a few decades, or who knows, maybe a century from now, and they might want to know that. So I might keep saying it anyway. Out in the farm country, there weren't very many neighbors, and there was chores to do and animals to feed and things to take care of. And during the school year, there was schoolwork to do and all of that. We didn't have TV, like I said, until I was in the 3rd grade. So when I was about 9 years old or so, and then and didn't have a telephone until I was 11 years old. And I think I've mentioned that. But anyway, so then you say, well, okay, so what did you do back in those days when you didn't have anything to think about? And if your thoughts lead your actions, then what thoughts did you have, and where did they lead you? Maybe you don't even want to know those questions. I'm going to tell you anyway. So brace yourself. Maybe it's just me, but I was always doing something or dreaming up something. Quite often, we didn't have a lot of toys, and the toys that we did have, like I said, came out of a willow patch or something that we improvised on our own, some sort of game that we made up or whatever. But quite often, when I'd get thinking about something, I didn't need much to amuse myself. I would go get a shovel. And as I'm talking right now, I'm thinking about, I can think of 4 different instances where I dug a hole that was big, big for a kid to dig. I would just start digging in the ground. I might be goofy or something, I don't know, but I would just start digging in the ground and throwing the dirt out of the ground, not knowing for sure what I was even doing, just throwing dirt. Pretty soon I'd get the idea that maybe I'd make it into a underground hideout. They were kind of big into hideouts back in those days because we'd make them in the haystacks. We'd pull the bales around and put some old slabs across it and put the bales back on top. And if we camouflaged it just right, we'd have this hideout in the haystack and nobody would know it. Well, we could do the same thing with ground, I found out. You could dig and dig and dig and throw the dirt out of the hole. And then these same slabs. Now, a slab was the first cutting of a log, and it was not a very expensive piece of lumber. So if there were a few of them laying around, I didn't feel too bad about using them. And sometimes my father didn't know where they'd gone till I was done with them, but they came in handy for my hideouts. I dig these holes, and just to give you an idea, they would probably be maybe 6 by 6 or 7 or something like that, which is a pretty good size hole. And sometimes it'd take days. It'd be a project. It'd take days to get them dug. And there's 2 or 3 times I got the neighborhood kids involved in it. And it's no fun to dig all alone, especially if it's hard work. Anyway, they'd get involved in it, bring their shovels over, and we'd dig, and we were going to make ourselves this hideout underground. Well, when you got the dirt all out of the hole, the way you'd go get some of these slabs and poles and different things, and you'd lay them over. And what we'd usually do is get an old piece of cardboard that had come off of a refrigerator or something that somebody had bought, or maybe a piece of old canvas or something we put over the slabs, and then we start chucking this dirt back on top. So we'd have this hole in the ground that you could actually crawl down into. Now, you couldn't stand up once you were there. You'd have to crawl around on your hands and knees. But still, it was a hideout. And if you slipped into it on one side, kind of camouflaged the entrance, you could all of a sudden just be gone and nobody'd know where you're at. And that's what we were after. So, like I said, there were 2 or 3 times when I was growing up that we got ambitious and just started digging and digging and digging until we had a hideout. I don't know what there was about digging. And there was one time, I'll never forget it. I was out in the garden and I thought, well, I'll dig a hole here. And I really wasn't going for a hideout. I just wanted to see, I guess I was just trying to see how deep I could go. And of course, if you're going to go quite deep, you have to, cut yourself a pretty good sized hole, like 4 feet or 3 feet at least, and give yourself some work to work the shovel in there and jump down in and throw dirt out. So I was out in our garden spot after it was after gardening season, and we'd had our first frost, and there was no more garden produce out there. So I thought that'd be a great place. The ground was fairly loose. So I went out there and dug this hole that I guess maybe 3.5 by 3.5 feet square, and it went down. I just kept digging and digging and thinking, gosh, this is pretty soft digging. There'd been a rain or something that softened the ground up. And I just kept going down, throwing the dirt up out of the hole. And pretty soon there got to be quite a hole there. And I guess this is part of my hideout. Part of my hideout experience came to visit because I thought, heck, if I got a big hole like this and I'm going to keep working on it, I better cover it up or somebody know what I've got here and put the kibosh to the whole project. So what I did is, and I do remember this time, it was a piece of cardboard. It was a pretty heavy-duty piece, and I'm not sure where it came from, but I rounded it up, pulled it over there, over the top of that hole, with some slab or 2 under it, hold it up, and I started throwing the dirt back on it, making sure that until I got back to it again, nobody would even know it was there. So I did. And then I just forgot about it. Well, about 4 or 5 days later, I was in the house, and my dad came in the house, and he was wondering where I was. And I could tell I was in a little bit of trouble, because what had happened was he needed my help, and what he needed my help doing was getting his tractor unstuck out of the garden. He had gone out there and started plowing the garden and didn't know that hole was there, and just run his hind wheel up over that hole, and it dropped the hind wheel of that tractor right into that hole, and it was deep enough that he couldn't get out, and it caused a little heartburn for him. Before he finally solved it, found another tractor, a truck to pull himself out of the hole, and I'll never forget. He didn't really get mad at me, because I think down deep he kind of admired the fact that I had some energy I wanted to burn off or something, digging holes. There was something about that, but I didn't have an idle mind, is kind of where I'm going with all this. Because you've heard the statement, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. Well, there's always a hole to dig. So that was my way of kind of not having an idle mind, I guess. It was kind of a dumb activity, but it worked. And I've thought since then that maybe the Lord actually set this bell to ringing and told me, go dig a hole. That's better than what else you might get into if you're not out doing something. So So I went and dug holes. And we do crazy things on the farm when we were just, when there wasn't really, I'm sure we could have found a fence to fix somewhere, but sometimes that got old too. And if we weren't forced to, we'd start to get creative. I'll tell you about one that we did that was creative that you're going to kind of roll your eyes at. But sometimes we get younger kids in the neighborhood, and the cows down there, sometimes out in the pasture, they just roam free. And I don't know why, but me and this cousin of mine, we decided to play a trick on these kids. And yes, they were a little younger and they were naive. And we'd find some treats. I can't remember. I think we had a candy bar or some little toy or something. And we'd put it under a bucket. And then we'd get them all lined up around the edge of the bucket. And they'd say, okay, as soon as we pull that bucket off, you got to grab whatever's under there. And the first one that grabs it gets it. And so we set them up like that. And it was only a setup because it gets worse from here. This is where you roll your eyes. Because what we were really trying to do is get him really grabbing without even hardly looking at what they were grabbing at. And then we would set that bucket over a fresh cow pie. That's awful, isn't it? It is. I don't know about that one. Anyway, we'd set it over a fresh cow pie, and sure enough, we had them trained to grab so quick that before they realized what was happening, they had their hands in it. Anyway, as I remember it, yeah, they went and told their mothers, and we got in trouble and whatever. But so we didn't have idle minds, but we weren't focused on good stuff. We were focused on a little treachery there, and it got us in trouble like treachery usually does. But I remember, speaking of the neighborhood, we'd have ice skating parties. So like on a Friday night, it wasn't school, there's no ball games or anything to go to. And the houses down there are about a quarter of a mile apart. And so you'd have to kind of plan things on the bus coming home from school, saying, hey, come over to the pond tonight. We'll have somebody scrape it off, the snow off, and we'll have ice hockey. And we'd get old tires, take them out in the middle of the pond, set them on fire. And the whole neighborhood would be down there skating around the pond on their ice skates, having a great time. And we didn't watch TV. We didn't play video games. We weren't watching ball games on TV or just creating good old activity. And some of those hockey games got pretty exciting. We just make a make-believe puck out of some old piece of rubber that somebody had in their garage, and we'd get something and kind of fashion it into a stick that we could hit it with, and set up goals and all that. We had a regular hockey game. There was one pond in particular that we used, and I kind of felt embarrassed about it afterwards, because in the spring of the year when the ice had melted off, after a few winters of that, there was this big mound of tire wires in that. And you say, well, where's the wires in a tire? But when the tires would burn off, they did have wires in the treads, and there'd be this residue that was left out there. And anyway, it didn't look very good. The environmentalists would not be pleased if they saw it today, let's put it that way. And eventually if the conditions were just right, we'd get out there and try to clean it up, start over again another year. But that's another example of how you just create your own activities. Some of them are better than others, but hockey was a good one. And I'll never forget going till sometimes close to midnight with the hockey games. And even on cold nights, if it got cold, we'd come over and we'd get next to the fire, turn around, warm one side and then the other. And it was quite interesting. Another thing I used to do when I had time, especially in the summer months, there usually wasn't very much time, spare time in the summer, because we always had something to do. But how's the phrase go? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, or something like that. And somehow our parents knew that we needed a little playtime. And it was always easy because it wasn't, I'd guess it maybe 40 yards down the road from where my house was, there was this slough that you've heard me talk about before, kind of a deep, or anyway, kind of an indentation in the ground where water would run in the spring of the year especially. And it would run down and then clear, eventually get to the open creek, and a fish would swim up it. Clear up there, it would be miles, a couple of miles to get up there, and there was this culvert right just below my house, and we'd look down in there and we could see fish. And I thought that's pretty cool. They weren't very big fish. They're what we call minnows. The biggest was about maybe 3 inches, and then lots of little ones. But they were always intriguing, and we'd try to, you could never catch them, and they were too little to bite a hook or anything like that. So they just kind of tormented us because we liked to catch them, see what we could do. And I can remember we would get cans and set down there because we thought, well, we'll get them to go inside of a can, like a can of an old used can of corn or a can of peas or just some sort of a can. And we put it down there, and if we got the paper off of it, it was kind of silver that seemed to attract them a little more. But it seemed like if they went in, we just couldn't get it picked up fast enough, and they'd get out from it. We finally figured out how to do it, though. What we'd do, that's what I say, you start thinking about stuff, start seeing those fish out there and wondering how you're going to catch them. And if we finally found out that if we took the top off the can, or saved the top, that little round shiny thing, and we put it right in front of the can, down under the water, and the water was only 6 or maybe a foot deep, or sometimes less in some spots. And if we put it right down next to the front of the can, it seemed to attract the fish. And lo and behold, it did attract them, and we'd get down there and get off to one side and be really, really still. Those fish would come up and get in that can. We'd hurry and pick up the can and take them up on the road, put them in a bucket of water, and we'd have a collection of fish. I'm not sure what kind they were. I think some of them were carp, little carp, which eventually becomes a big fish, but they were small. And I don't know what the others were, but there was a lot of them. And eventually we'd take them up, and in the summer months we had a place that we dug. My father had dug it down so that we could put and lined it with lumber, and so that we could put water, water in it and cool off the milk cans that we brought up from the barn until the milk truck come to get them. We couldn't just let the milk sit out there in the sun, or it would get soured, and then they would reject our milk. And when they rejected our milk, it always came back with a pink coloring dye in it. That meant our milk was just something wrong with it, and they wouldn't take it. So we cooled it well. Turns out that turned to be a good place to dump our bucket full of fish in. We'd put them in that watering trough that we had for the milk cans, and luckily they never got in the milk cans, but it was just something we did to amuse ourselves. Figure out something to do. And I've wondered, what do city kids do when they don't have anything to do? I don't know. I've seen some of them, they go down to the malls or whatever and just roam around the malls. Don't really spend any money, but just do nothing. And I'm just grateful I had I had the wherewithal and the setting to really enjoy life, whether it was cow pies or minnows or ice skating or you name it. It was a good time. One of the things I'll mention one of the things, then I'll just stop because you're probably getting tired of this by now. But down there were certain places where there were ponds, and there would be what we called cattails. And you might say, well, why do you call them cattails? Well, there's probably another formal name for them, but they grew up, and in the fall of the year they'd have kind of it'd be like a hot dog shaped cone, brown cone, and it would ripen as the fall came along, and it would and we'd pick those out of those wet areas where they grew. And I forget who was with me this day. It might have been my younger brother, I think it was. But we decided that it would be fun to strip those cattails, and when you'd strip them like with a knife or something that you could kind of shred them with and they were ripe, they would just kind of turn into a fuzzy, anyway, it'd almost fly away in the air. It was so light, and it was almost like a cottony kind of stuff. I don't know how else to describe it. But we had quite a few of them, and we got a bunch of them, and this gravel road that I keep talking about, we got them in the garage, which is just off the gravel road, and we said, well, let's do this. Let's scrape these cattails, and we made a pile of them, of the fuzzy stuff that came off of them across that road. There wasn't all that much traffic, so we had plenty of time to work, and we made kind of we'll say a windrow of this fuzzy cattail stuff, and we put it across the road, and we'd make it so it was, in some places it was like, maybe 8 inches tall, and went clear across the road. And you say, well, why'd you do that? And all we were looking for is some car to drive through it and see what would happen. See, it was really fluffy, and we just thought it would just be interesting to see some car drive through that and see what happens. And so we put it out there, and sure enough, here came a car, and it was light enough colored that I don't think they saw it, and they drove through it, and the fuzz went clear up in the air, maybe 8 or 10 feet, and flew all over the place, and we got a big kick out of it. And I think we tried it one more time, and then we gave up on that, and decided to go to something else. But those are the kind of things that would keep us going, so that we didn't have an idle mind, and so that we didn't have a place for the devil's workshop. So don't let the devil set up house in your mind by letting it be idle, because you really can't make it be idle. It's going to gravitate to something good. Maybe don't let it go to the cow pie thing. That was not good, but it was better than pornography and stuff like that. I can tell you that. So anyway, well, you got to know me a little bit, and through all these stories maybe. And yeah, even on the farm, we weren't working all the time. We had some fun. So I hope you had fun listening to some of it. I don't suppose that you'll put this one on the must-see list when you're done with it. And share it around, but that's okay too. I love you anyway. Bye.